Scott Mehman here and Mark Dudley, and we'll kind of get started. We're going to be talking today about the CivaCommand Smart Tank system. We'll start by talking about the history of what the system is, why we've done it, and how it works today in current state. And we'll talk about a few things that we're going to do maybe in future state CivaCommand. So CivaCommand, what this does is it's a cargo tank system. It is designed to go on cargo tank trailers, cargo tank trucks. And what it does is it's a digital overfill protection system. To give you an example of how this is different than conventional tank systems, speaking of overfill in regards to overfill, CivaCommand actually takes the place of conventional cargo tank components. This happens to be an onboard monitor that you would find on conventional cargo tanks. This is our version of it. This is an analog onboard monitor. We call it a ROM monitor. So we basically build in our onboard monitor within the system itself. I'll elaborate on that just a little bit as we move forward. And also, I'll step off camera here for a minute. We also integrate our air control systems for cargo tank within the system as well. So this is our SCP air control panel that's commonly found on cargo tank equipment. As you can see, our design at CivaCommand is a push-pull style panel. We have an air pressure gauge here. We have what we call a pop-up indicator that will give the user verification that the vapor vents are open, and then the push-pull air operator. What I like about this being integrated into CivaCommand is because this is a mechanical component. After you use this for a while, our version or our competitors, sometimes we develop air leaks, but we can eliminate that with this integrating this into this touchscreen display here on CivaCommand. So the other difference with CivaCommand, as you compare it to other cargo tanks, happens to be mostly on the loading head side. Okay, so how is it different? Well, the loading heads are our conventional loading heads that you see every day on cargo tank equipment out there in the world. It's different in several different ways. And I think I'll start by saying that the CivaCommand loading heads, or APIs as we call them, have this unique little device down here that you see on this side of the APIs. And we call those, it's a fluid property sensor or fuel sensor. And what this fuel sensor is designed to do, how this is different than a conventional system, is that when drivers or cargo tanks that are accepting fuel at loading terminals, as the fuel is loading, this fuel sensor is trying to identify that fuel and put it into a fuel family. We have two different fuel families. We have gasoline and we have diesel fuel. Okay, the other thing that this little sensor does is it acts like a retained fuel sensor. So we're actually looking at fuel as we're unloading fuel. It will actually tell the driver that the compartment is empty. And if you can see on our touchscreen, we have 3 empty compartments, and that's because the fuel sensor says that we're empty. So if you think on a conventional cargo tank, some owners of cargo tanks have a retained fuel sensor or a retained sensor that is in a weldment in the bottom of the cargo tank. We can eliminate that. We use our empty visibility right here in this fuel sensor. The other difference, there's 2 other differences on this API head versus conventional API heads, is on the bottom, there's actually a pneumatic lock, and I'll explain the reason why the pneumatic lock is important. It actually will lock this load head from opening if it's not allowed to open. I'll explain that a little bit as we go into the cross drop prevention functionality of CivaCommand. And we also have back in behind here, and I know that you folks can't see it from your position, but there's also another sensor, and what this sensor is designed to do is basically tell the system that the load head is either open or closed. And why that is important is another thing that I'll explain as I go through today's demo. So API heads are different. The air controls are integrated within the touchscreen or the system itself, and our overfill protection is also integrated into our CivaCommand system. So Those are the three primary functional components that are integrated. Any questions so far from the gallery? All right, so let's talk about the driver experience when we compare it from a conventional cargo tank and CivaCommand or a digital cargo tank. So in today's demo, as you can see, I've got a 3-compartment tank here. Typically, the touchscreen display is mounted on the cargo tank in a similar position as where you would find an onboard monitor and also the terminal sockets that the trailer or cargo tank truck is plugged into when we get to the loading terminal. Okay, so usually it's someplace in a cabinet, and the driver interacts with this touchscreen. As you can see down at the bottom, you'll see these 3 little, we call them buttons. And basically, when the driver activates these buttons, it will activate a solenoid and it will actually open the belly valves. And you can see those 3 belly valves opening up there. The top right, there's a top right button. We call this a main air button. And what this does is it actually replaces the master air switch on a conventional air panel. So we push this in, it's closed, we pull it out, it's open. So if we close this back up, it will actually close all 3 of those belly valves at the same time. In the upper left-hand corner, we have an air pressure gauge that basically when the main air is on, it will tell the user how much air pressure. In this simulation here, we've got about 119 pounds of air pressure, which is pretty normal for a cargo tank. The lower left-hand corner, we have something called a fault indicator. So far, if there's something wrong internally within the CivaCommand system, if it's blue, that means we have no active faults. If it's red, it means there's something that needs our attention, okay? And then finally, in the bottom right, there's a menu button, and we'll go into the user menu at some point in time during today's demo to explain some of the functionality within the menu. And then further down to the lower right, there's a little clock on there. So today, we're going to be talking about what we call crossover prevention. So we call that here at CivaCommand, it's an acronym called COPS, which stands for Crossover Prevention System. How we actually enable COPS to be functional is through the settings screen. But right now, as you just noticed, I went through and I was able to open up all the belly valves on the trailer. We can also open up the APIs because they are not locked currently, okay? So for the duration of today's demo, I'm going to be talking about COPS and crossover prevention. So Mark and I will work together to set this up so we're in COPS mode. So we'll come into a menu setting. We will enter a factory default passcode, which when you buy this from the factory, it's 4 zeros. And you're going to find a selection called COPS there on the right-hand column of choices. So right now it's disabled. I'm going to go ahead and enable it. And I'm going to just back out to the home screen, okay? One more time there. And you can kind of see at the top center of the screen, I'll say CivaCommand plus COPS. That means I'm now in COPS mode. I just simply cycle the air one time and turn it back on. Now I'm in COPS mode. So I'm in crossover prevention mode. All my APIs are locked. And I also have lost the ability to open up my internal belly valves. Any questions about that so far, Mark, from anybody? Hopefully I've explained that well enough. So now we're in COPS mode, okay? And we're empty, and I'm gonna kind of like play the part of a petroleum transport driver. I'm going to feel like I'm gonna head out to the terminal. I'm going to give everybody on today's webinar a demonstration of what the driver goes through when we go to the loading terminal to load this. Before I do that, I'm going to explain that CivaCommand runs in 2 modes of operation. The mode of operation that's in right now is what we call highway or delivery mode. When we're at the loading terminal and we're loading this, we're going to enter a loading mode. So I'll have to get a drink of water here. Show you how that works. We pull in the loading rack bay, and how this goes into loading mode is when we hook up our grounding cord at the loading terminal on the socket here, you're going to see the system go into loading mode, as you can see from the touchscreen. So let's talk a little bit about what the driver sees here at this point in time. We're actually looking at our compartments have now switched. The view says loading on all three compartments. In the bottom center, this is a little graphic we call a permit beacon. And what we're looking at on the permit beacon is we're looking at 6 different measurements of permit at the loading rack. And we can just go around this permit beacon. I can kind of explain what we're looking at. We're looking to make sure that the trailer is properly grounded. Okay, this is a safety feature. If we find that the grounding system is not functioning properly, we would not have a green piece to this pie. We also are looking at the socket itself. Okay, is the socket hooked up? Is it communicating with the system, and is it communicating with a rack? If that wasn't the case, our little socket piece of the pie would obviously be red. We're looking at the overfill sensors within each compartment of the cargo tank itself. Okay, these are located up on the manhole cover. They're obviously designed to stop the pumping operation if they are wetted. So it says right now that they are functioning, which is good. So we have permit there. The little main air says we have the main air is on. We have enough air pressure to hold the belly valves open, and we also have enough air pressure to hold the vents on top of the trailer so that when liquid is loaded into the cargo tank, we will be venting out through the vapor vents up on the manhole covers, out through the overturn rail, and then out in process with the loading terminal facility. Okay. And then also we have our vents down here. It says our vents are open, our sequential vents on top of the cargo tank itself. If one of those is, out here in Kansas City, it get cold. If it's frozen, a little piece of water gets in there. If we didn't get our sequential vents all opened up, we would have a non-permit right here at the vents. And then finally, we've got one right here that says vapor, and we're still in the red. Basically, what this is telling the driver, when we touch the center of this graphic there, it will say the vapor recovery is not connected. So what I need to do as a driver is I need to come back to the back of the trailer or wherever the vapor recovery device is set up at, and I just basically plug that into the trailer. There's a little brake interlock there. And once I activate that, it will tell me I've got full permit and I'm ready to set this load up inside of the loading rack terminal facility there. So full permit, as you can see, all the internal valves or emergency valves on the bottom of the trailer open automatically. There wasn't another process that I had to go through as a driver. They opened automatically, so I can go ahead and set this load up in what they call the carding room. So you card in your load. You're going to set your recipes. You're going to set your shippers and that sort of thing before we come back out and start loading fuel. All right, let's start loading fuel here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually set these sensors, these fuel sensors, to simulate some sort of fuel being loaded onto this cargo tank. So once the driver couples onto this load head, we're going to dispense that fuel through the meter at the loading facility. And once we're all done loading this compartment, we can go ahead and close this belly valve by basically touching this button here. Closes the belly valve, and the fuel sensor, this fuel sensor here, has told the driver that you have loaded some sort of gasoline. Okay, this is the point where the driver is going to go ahead and touch this little graphic here, this compartment box, and we're going to tell the system what octane level of gasoline that we loaded. We've got a low grade choice, we've got a mid grade choice, we've got high grade. We've got E100, which is straight ethanol, and we've also got E85. Okay, what you don't have to choose from as a driver is we don't have any distillates or diesel fuel or kerosene. And you can see that on the touchscreen right now. So just for simulation purposes, we're going to say we've loaded some high grade gasoline. And you can see how the little symbol on the touchscreen is changed to high-grade gasoline. And we just repeat this process until all compartments are loaded. So let's just work our way over to this compartment. I'm going to go ahead and close this compartment up. And this compartment actually, the fuel sensor says you've loaded, Mr. Scott, you've loaded some sort of diesel fuel. So let's go in here and we can find out which choices we have here on the diesel fuel. So we've got clear diesel, we've got dyed diesel, or we got some other crazy variation of diesel. Okay, what you don't have is gasoline. So we can't actually choose gasoline. Okay, so for this demo, I'm going to select clear diesel fuel. And you can see how the little graphic has changed in the compartment box to indicate that that compartment now has clear diesel fuel. Finally, over here on this final compartment, I'm going to close this compartment up. And once again, it said the fuel sensor has said you have loaded some sort of gasoline. So we come in here and I'm going to also call this premium gasoline or high grade gasoline. So this is the driver process. Very simple. Training for drivers is really super simple. I've done it many, many times. It's pretty easy to figure out. We've made this what I call Mark and his guys in the engineering and design team. We made this coloring book simple, very simple for the drivers. The training is, go in there and load it and you'll figure it out. It's really just that simple. So at this point in time, we feel like we're all loaded up. If we decide or have discovered that we've made a mistake, we can actually come back in here before we get ready to pull out the loading rack. I could say, for instance, on this diesel fuel, maybe it wasn't clear diesel fuel. Maybe I made a mistake. It was actually dyed. So I can actually reset that fuel selection and I can come back there and I can change it to whatever I want. And that's just, I'm just showing you that you can do that. In this case, we actually did load undyed diesel fuel, or ULSD is what we call it. So I'm going to go with ultra low sulfur diesel. Mark, catch up there. Did I walk on you?
I think I will.
Okay, there we go. So now I've changed it back and now I'm ready to basically reverse my process so I can pull my equipment out of the loading facility and get my shipping paperwork and get ready to head on out to the delivering location where I'm going to. So how do I do that? Well, I start by turning the master air control off. Okay, and you can see how my permit beacon is now starting to change colors. I'm going to go back to the back of the trailer. I'm going to unhook my vapor recovery hose. That's usually tied in with a brake interlock and air system. And then also we would come up and we would take our grounding cord off, replace the dust cap on my socket there. And you can see on the touchscreen itself that the driver needs to exit this loading mode. So at this point in time, I'm going to select exit loading. And then I want to confirm my loaded fuels, okay? Same situation as before. If I feel like this is not the fuel that I've loaded, I can always dismiss this and go back and change them. But since I've already done that, I'm going to confirm my loaded fuels. And now I'm back into CivaCommand highway mode, delivery mode. I'm no longer in loading mode. And I basically have all my APIs are secure, they're locked up. I cannot open up any of my belly valves. I can pull out of the loading rack and I can get my shipping paperwork. Compartments 1 and 3 have got premium gasoline in. Compartment number 2 has clear ULSD diesel fuel. Okay. So one thing I wanted to mention as we go through this demo, you can see right now that my main air is off. Okay. By design, when the main air is off on our CivaCommand system, after 1 minute, our touchscreen will go into sleep mode. So basically, it doesn't mean it's broke. It will just, it won't display anymore. So for the duration of today's demo, to keep it going from going into sleep mode, I'm going to turn that main air back on as I talk through some of the delivery process with today's attendees on today's webinar. So anyway, let's talk about cross drop prevention and what we need to prevent cross drops in retail fuel deliveries. Okay. We're going to talk about a couple different components that are needed. And we're going to start with this little gizmo right here. We call this an RFID tag. And what this RFID tag is, we program these to whatever our customers have in fuel storage at retail delivery sites. Okay. This one in my hand has been programmed for mid-grade gasoline, okay? And it actually says it right here on the tag. And where this basically mounts to is if you look at this spill bucket right here, it might be hard to see, but we basically mount that on the fill pipe just below what we call the brass ring or the coupler ring on that fill pipe, okay? There's a little stainless steel lanyard, and we just put that on there and we tighten that up. Now this bucket here, you might be able to see this RFID tag. It basically is mounted, and we actually have it loose enough where we can actually move it too. Now that's not going to cause any problems at all. That's perfect mounting, okay? So that basically just lives inside that spill bucket at that retail site. And we program these for whatever our customers have in storage. Today we have low bid, high grade gasoline, unblended ethanol. We have low bid, high grade gasoline, blended ethanol. We've got biodiesel. We've got dyed diesel. We've got clear diesel. And we've got kerosene, and whatever you have in storage, we have a tag for, okay? So that's the RFID tags. The other thing that we need is our drop elbow or delivery gun. You hear them called so many things in the industry right now, but this is our, and I say our, I'm saying the CivaCommand 60TT. It's a very standard drop elbow. We make them in a standard size, a tall size. We make a coaxial version of that. Anyway, this is a little bit of a modified version of our 60TT. You might notice there's a little, what we call radio pack back here. It's mounted in a very heavy duty protective bracket, very sturdy, very durable. But this little radio pack is designed to basically look at this RFID tag and communicate wirelessly with our CivaCommand system that's on the cargo tank itself. And how this works, there's a little magnet right here. And when I cam onto my underground storage tank, it asks this little radio pack to wake up and start looking for a signal from an RFID tag, okay? So if we cam this right here, you're gonna notice that it's gonna say, up here on the cargo tank itself, you're gonna see on the touchscreen where it says, I have found an RFID tag, okay? This elbow is talking back up to the transport. It says, okay, I'm giving you access to a diesel fuel on that cargo tank, okay? And you can see down here, it says, I found a diesel tag, and I've actually did you a favor, and I've opened up the belly valve for you already. As you can see, the belly valve's open. I don't have to take any extra steps, tripping over hoses or whatever. The belly valve's already open, okay? So at this point in time, I have access to fuel in this compartment, which is diesel fuel, right? If I've got this hose hooked up, if I run it out here to this drop elbow, I can open this up and I can start unloading fuel, okay? If I had a hose hooked up to this compartment, with my water out of the way, I wouldn't be able to open this up because I've got premium gasoline in here. If I try to open this up, my API is actually locked because of that lock on the bottom, and also don't have access to open up the compartment here. On a conventional cargo tank system, this system, we would be able to open that up and we would be putting premium gas into that diesel tank, and we'd start to have a bad day quite rapidly. So we're preventing a cross drop, and that's how we're doing it, okay? Right now, I do not have any of my load heads or API heads open, all right? Let's say, for instance, the driver, because I also have premium gas on, and right here I've got premium gas in this spill bucket here. Same situation, I've got my radio back on here. Down in this bucket, I know you can't see it, we've got an RFID tag that says this is premium gas. Cam this on here. I now have two elbows cammed at the same time. And you probably heard something happen. My belly valve closed, and the screen now says, we've got a multi-elbow alert. Does that mean something's broken? No, that doesn't mean something's broken. That just means that we have two elbows cammed on underground storage tanks at the same time. This is basically telling the driver that trailer doesn't know where the hoses are at, okay? So because I don't know where the hoses are at, I have basically got to decommit one of my drop elbows, okay? Once I do that, my little warning goes away there, and I can start dispensing fuel, okay? So right now I have access to my diesel fuel. I can go ahead and get this fuel started by starting to let that fuel flow into that underground storage tank. The reason we do that is basically because we don't know where the hoses are at, okay? Now that we know we have fuel safely flowing into the correct tank, we can now go ahead and cam onto our premium tank. The system automatically opens up 2 belly valves or 2 emergency valves on the bottom. And based on what you want to do as a driver, we can get that fuel started into that premium storage tank. So let's get this fuel started. And you can notice that this other one will close down, and we'll also lock access to that compartment, okay? So right now we have fuel flowing in 2 different tanks, okay? We've got diesel fuel, we've got premium gasoline. If you notice here, these little graphics up here, they just simply tell the driver that you now have fuel flowing in these 2 out of these 2 compartments, okay? Diesel, premium gas. Let's talk about some events that can cause some headaches for fleets as well. Part of our CivaCommand Smart Tank system is understanding what we call retained fuel events. Retained fuel events are, retained fuel is basically, the definition of retained fuel is undelivered fuel left in that cargo tank. It might be by accident or it might be by design. I know in my 25 years of experience, there might be a situation where somebody will be dispatched out to a site and say, fill this place up, fill this tank up as full as you can get it, and then take the rest down the street. Other times drivers wouldn't know. One example with that would be where we have lost enough air pressure on our tank where a belly valve would close unbeknownst to the driver, causing retained fuel to be left on board. We take that back to the terminal, we load on top of it, and that's another bad thing that can happen for 2 reasons. It can cause a safety problem at the terminal. We might have a spill, an overfill event. And at the end of the day, that fuel that got taken back to the loading terminal actually belonged to your customer. You know, that retail customer wanted that fuel and we didn't give it to them. So let's give a couple examples of how this system will alert the driver of a retained fuel event. Let's use the example of I've lost air pressure in my belly valve, so I'm going to use diesel fuel, this tank as an example. If my belly valve closes, I am going to get what we call a retain warning, okay? It says compartment number 2 has detected a retain condition, okay? If I move this out of the way here, if I dismiss this, you're going to see that we currently have an active fault. Down here, the fault graphic is going to say, okay, I'm in fault mode, okay? That means we have something wrong. Well, what is it? I can touch this and it's going to say, you have a retain warning, okay? Wonder what caused that. More than likely that was caused because what we call pneumatic decay. We've lost air pressure, can't hold my belly valve open anymore. Oftentimes a driver will be looking through the sight glass on that drop elbow. They might notice that there's no fuel flowing through there anymore. I must be empty. Let's go back to the loading terminal. In this case, that's not the case. I actually have retained fuel on board, okay? Other questions when I'm going through this demo with customers, when they say, well, wait a minute, Scott, you've had all the fuel has flowed off of this fuel sensor is now down in the hose and maybe up closer to that drop elbow. Here's what happens. Even though this fuel sensor is dry right now and it's not reporting empty, we know that we have retained fuel because that belly valve or that emergency valve closed before this fuel sensor had time to tell the driver that you're empty. So we know that we're in retained fuel mode here. I've got this warning going on right now. Let's say, for instance, I want to open up, I get air pressure back to my equipment. I open this belly valve back up. My retained fuel warning goes away, and eventually this fuel sensor's fuel is cascades out of this API head. Once that fuel gets done unloading, that compartment will report to empty. And this is a good time to know that our compartment's empty. I can go ahead and close my API head, and the system actually automatically closes that belly valve for me. I don't have to go back to that operator and close this back up or touch this, okay? It does that thing automatically for me. So I can go ahead and pull that drop cable off. I can stick that tank and do the rest of my normal activity as a transport driver, okay? Still flowing fuel here on compartment number 1. I wanted to mention something to you about CivaCommand being a digital cargo tank system. One of the benefits of that, of it being a digital system, is it has the ability to store events in memory, okay? If you can remember, we had retain events on this number 2 compartment, okay? Number 2 compartment had retain. It actually stores that on a micro SD memory card. So anything that happens here, if we have to go back in 2 hours or 2 days or 2 weeks to any events that would happen, we can always go back and we can figure out what they happened, because those events are stored on a micro SD card. We're still flowing fuel into that premium tank, okay? We're flowing fuel over here. Second example of a retained fuel event would be when the driver has to close the API head before that fuel sensor reports empty, okay? So we can go ahead and close this up. Same situation. We've got a retain warning. If you remember earlier in my demonstration, we've got a little fuel sensor or a little handle sensor back here. And what that does is it tells the system when the API is open or closed. Because it's closed and my fuel sensor hadn't reported empty yet, I know that I've got retained fuel. Now, as an ex-gas hauler myself, I know that I might have to close that API for a lot of different reasons. Maybe the potato chip guys there or whatever. You know, there's times when these valves will be closed while fuel is still flowing for a lot of different reasons. This is just reminding the driver that I have a retained fuel event. So let's go ahead and open this back up. My little retained fuel event has gone away, and eventually my fuel is going to be delivered in that compartment. So what I simply do here is I can close this up. My belly valve up here is closing. I can just simply move over this one. If you notice, this one is open back up, and I can just simply get fuel flowing here again. So I've got these 2 compartments are empty. Once I get this one emptied out, I basically just wait for the system to tell me I'm empty, and then I can just go ahead and walk out my hoses, close this up. If you notice, my belly valve is going to close here. I can pull my drop elbow off of this underground storage tank, and I can finish my delivery. I can stick my tanks and do that sort of thing. And I'm ready to go back to the loading terminal to get my next load. So that's an example of how we deliver fuel in what we call COPS mode. Any questions from the group? Mark, all's quiet? All's quiet. I must be doing a really good job of explaining all the features and benefits of CivaCommand. So couple other things I wanted to mention here. So we kind of like showed you the difference between conventional tank systems and CivaCommand. We kind of gave you a demonstration of both loading and unloading a cargo tank coach with CivaCommand. I just want to talk about a couple other things that we can do with CivaCommand. So we're talking about RFID tags, okay? All fine and dandy. We go out there and we install these inexpensive RFID tags. But my next load is going to be hauling a load of commercial fuel for somebody, and I don't have RFID tags. So the question always comes up, how do I get around that? Well, our system is designed to be able to be put in what we call bypass mode. And what that means is that we are going to take and turn off the locking mechanisms within CivaCommand, okay? If I have to bypass it, there's probably a reason that we have to bypass it. If we do bypass it, keep in mind it does keep a digital record of that. So if we have a driver putting it into bypass when we have RFID tags, we'll have an opportunity, a coaching opportunity with that driver, okay? But in this case, we're actually loading, you know, a load of maybe dyed fuel at a, you know, for a commercial account someplace. So let me show you how we put this thing in bypass. Right now I've got empty compartments here, but if we touch one of these compartment boxes, this system will be now in bypass. Did I go too fast for it? There we go. And you can tell them in bypass mode. So if you notice the little gray triangles in that box, that basically means I'm in bypass mode. So when you see that, it means we're in bypass. I can open up that belly valve, and I can also open up this API here. Totally bypassed up for whatever reason. You know, you're on your own there if you're in bypass mode. Drivers know that, so we want to be extra careful that we don't make any delivery mistakes in bypass mode. I can also do this if I have to bypass all compartments for delivery. I simply would come into my menu screen and I would go into a full truck bypass by just enabling my full truck bypass. And now, I'm sorry, did I screw that up? There we go. Now we're in full truck bypass. So there are a couple different ways of doing bypass. If you're a carrier, a commercial carrier or a private carrier, you're hauling to all retail sites with RFID tags, you'll very rarely be in bypass mode. But you know, we live in the real world. There's going to be times when drivers will have to unlock things. That's a couple different ways. There's a couple different other ways that we could do it. But the point I'm trying to make is that we have the ability to unlock the API heads and get access to the belly valves as well. So I'm going to just cycle here real quick to go back into COPS mode. I want to talk about some other things within the system. If we come back into our menu, there's going to be, we can go into a system diagnostics screen. How this is handy for mechanics out there is we kind of get a general overview of the health of our system itself. We're going to be looking at the health of our overfill probe sensors. Right now, green is good. All three of our probes are good. Let's say, for instance, I have my equipment in for my wet test. This screen is kind of handy where, move my air control all the way. Let's say I'm doing my wet test. I can come and wet these probes, and you can actually see how that graphic is turned from green to red. And I can go through and do my wet test using the screen. I can also check that my APIs are all, that my belly valves are all functioning. I can test the solenoids here. I apologize, Mark, if I'm going too fast. So just some handy things that like repair facilities would be using here. So I'm gonna close those back up. Oh, diagnostic screen, and then finally we have a little ground graphic there, so we can verify that our trailer is safely grounded. So everything, the health of our system right now looks good. It shows air pressure on the vents and the vapor popping at 117 pounds. So right now everything looks good here from that standpoint. The other thing that we can do is we have something here called a fault log. So if I would go into a fault log, let's say, for instance, something has happened to one of the overfill sensors for let's just say, as an example, if I have a problem with an overfill sensor and it basically is stored to memory on that fault log, if I go to the repair shop and the repair shop cannot find anything on that overfill sensor, we can simply go into a fault log, and we basically, there's one right there where there's an overfill probe fault. It basically has a zero time length of, it was basically faulted for less than a minute on June 6th, but it at least is basically stored in there so the mechanic can maybe find some place to start. So what we do with that fault log is we store the 12 most current faults. Typically, our system on a day-to-day, week by week, month by month, year by year activity, you're not going to see a lot of faults in the fault logs. But if you do need, as a mechanic, if you do need to look in there, they're found right there in that fault log. So other things that we can talk about here is we have another selection where we can look at some device lists. So if I look at, I can look at the health of our overfill sensors. Basically, probe life is good. It says green. It actually has the serial number of that probe on there. It has an install date on there, and I can cycle through my 3 overfill probes. I'm also going to be looking at some other components in the system. This happens to be what we call a probe hub. We can look at the health of that probe hub. It's green, it's good. What software version is on there, and just the sockets. We can look at the sockets. We're looking at the dial ground, chassis ground. It's all good. So another thing that's handy for repair shops and that sort of thing, Drivers usually wouldn't be looking at this, but it's just something that's different than our conventional CivaCommand system or CivaCon system of your analog overfill packages. So back out of there. System information just gives a little information about the system. It gives you an opportunity if you wanted to do a refresh on it. We could do a restart. We have the tech support hotline number in case a user has any issues with it. So nothing really there to talk about that's sexy and attractive. Back here in the settings, we have a lot of different configurations that we can do. We can basically put this in COPS mode. We can take it out of COPS mode. We basically can set the date and time from this screen. When you get when the OEMs or if you're doing a retrofit on this equipment, we can set the amount of compartments from the screen. We actually name the Bluetooth of the system. So when we're connecting wirelessly through Bluetooth, we know what device we're looking for. We can change a master passkey and some other things there within that setting screen. So that is basically current state CivaCommand, okay? So I want to talk a little bit about where we want to go from here with CivaCommand. And one of the things that Mark and his guys are working on is we're looking at like the retained fuel events that we had noted earlier. Like we know that we have retained fuel. What we don't know in current state CivaCommand is the volume of retained fuel. So we're working hard at having a solution for that. It should be out sometime in the future. So we'll actually not only know that we have retained fuel, we'll actually know the volumes of retained fuel. So that's one thing that we're working on future state. Go back to current state. One thing that we also offer today, if you choose to go with CivaCommand, we actually have the ability to send this information and we send it up to the cloud. So we have cloud services. We call that service CivaConnect. So it allows the user to log in to their computer at their desktop or at their home, and they have access to look at activity of the trailers. It has the ability to send alerts to a user via text messages or emails. For instance, we used that example before with that overfill probe. Let's say, for instance, that we have a piece of equipment out there that has a bad overfill probe. This system has the ability to send that information to the cloud and then ultimately to a fleet manager, a maintenance manager that the equipment has problems. So we call that CivaConnect. Okay. What am I missing here, Mark?
Yeah, most of it.
Pretty much covered the whole gamut of things.
Yeah, 45 minutes.
Okay. Any extra questions from the gallery at all? We also have Mr. Brian Gramling in the room. Any questions from you, Brian, at all? Or looking good? He's giving me the thumbs up. So again, this is CivaCommand was basically, you know, for all intents and purposes, COPS was invented way back in the 2012 or 13 timeframe, someplace back in then. So this is just basically continuation of many years worth of effort. This particular version of CivaCommand has been out since about 2016 or something like that. We have many cargo tanks in the US, in Mexico, and also in the Caribbean. The users just really enjoy it. There's a tremendous amount of benefits to using CivaCommand, which obviously includes cross-drop prevention and also retain visibility. But it's more, for me, it's more about what we're going to be able to do with CivaCommand next year or 10 years from now, just because it's resting on a digital platform. We feel, you know, CivaCon still makes conventional cargo tank components. We manufacture a lot of it. We're not ashamed of it. It's some of the most reliable cargo tank equipment in the world. But eventually, we feel like the direction of our industry should go towards digital and should take advantage of some of the things that a digital platform will offer versus an analog platform. So if we don't have any additional questions, I guess we got done a little bit early today. I just wanted to say on behalf of our team here at CivaCon, thank you so much for joining us.